Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission of Thursday, August 9th, 2018. Could we please have a roll call?
Commissioner Gomez?
Here.
Commissioner Mackin?
Here.
Commissioner Patel?
Here.
Commissioner Siason?
Here.
The records show Commissioner Gooding is absent.
Thank you. Could we have a motion for adoption of the agenda?
I make a motion that we adopt the agenda.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Adoption of the agenda is complete. Consent calendar, we have nothing on tonight. Oral communications, is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission on any item that does not appear on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move along. Written communications, I have one, but it's pertaining to an agenda item, so we'll include it with that. New business tonight, we have first a public hearing. It's a grading review for project number EX-2-17 for 90 Kings Road. It's an R1 residential district. Could we please have a staff report?
Yes, good evening, Commission. The application before you tonight is for grading review pertaining to development of a new single-family home on a vacant site on Kings Road. The grading review request is the grading review by the Commission is required due to the volume of soil cut and export from the site, which is approximately about just under 1,200 cubic yards per the grading plan. And as well as the cut, the grading plan calls for just under 40 cubic yards of soil fill. So it's just to So just to orient you to the site, you can see the subject property here highlighted in yellow on the map. So it's located in the first block of Kings Road, where it butts San Mateo Lane. And it is surrounded by residentially developed properties to the north and to the east. To the south, it's bounded by a portion, actually, of right-of-way that's owned by the city. And to the west, it is bounded by lands owned by the County of San Mateo. Here are some photos of the site. This photo, it's kind of an odd view, but it shows the trees in question on this property. So per the arborist report, which was attached to your staff report, there are 6 trees on the site. One tree, which is a coast live oak at the most western extent of the property, it's kind of at the top. Tree number 7, it's referred to, will be preserved, and that is considered a protected tree under the Title or Chapter 12 tree regulations. The other trees on the site consist of 4 coast live oaks that are smaller, less than 30 inches in trunk size. They're not protected. Those are shown in the foreground, as well as a pretty mature pine that per the per the arborist report is already showing some signs of beetle bark infestation and other potentially life-threatening risks to that tree. That is also proposed to be removed, and it is not protected. Though it does have a trunk circumference over 30 inches, the species itself is not protected. The other tree in question here, relevant to this application, is referred to as tree number 1 in the arborist report, and it's pretty close to the southeastern corner of the property, but per the survey is mostly within the public right-of-way portion just south of the site. So this is a street tree, Toyon, and due to it's a street tree and it has a trunk circumference over 30 inches, so that is a protected tree. So its removal, as well as the removal of, its removal is the only tree for which review is required in this application tonight. Here's a photo a little bit farther up the site looking northwest. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner that tree number 7, that coast live oak that is intended to be protected and preserved on the site. And you can also see directly north of the property at 70 Kings. And here's just a photo of taken in between 70 and 80 Kings Road. It kind of shows a terraced retaining wall system that is, as you'll see from the grading plan we'll look at next, kind of similar to the retaining wall design that's proposed in the north side yard of the subject property. So moving on to the actual grading plans. So here's a graphic that shows basically the footprint of proposed soil work. So you can see that the footprint includes not only the potential, the house itself, but also includes sidewalks, as well as the driveways for the garage and level front yard area, which is better illustrated here in the applicant's grading plan. So you can see again, right now, if we go back to the photos, you can see that there is no sidewalk. There's nothing on the west side of Kings Road right now. In fact, the property line ranges between 1 to 7 feet to the west of the edge of the paved road. So again, this is not uncommon to many of the streets in our hillside neighborhoods. So part of the grading plan and part of what the city engineer is requiring this applicant to do is to create a sidewalk along the property's frontage. They'll also be, they're proposing 2 driveways. So there'll be a portion of the driveways would extend into the public right-of-way as well. The basic grading, the plan involves creating 3 pads on the site. The lower pad would be occupied by the garages. So the applicant is proposing 2 two-car garages. There is a 4-car parking requirement for this house due to its size. To get them all on site, you know, there is no existing street parking. This is a very steep slope. To get them on site, while we don't require all of them to be covered, the applicant is proposing to do 2 covered garages to meet that requirement. Then the upper pad, of course, stepping up the hillside, would accommodate the 2nd and 3rd levels, and the highest pad accommodating the 4th. So these are some site sections, which were also attached to your staff report, showing basically sections of the site taken, kind of looking at the most southerly part of the property in section AA, and then looking from the northern portion of the property in section DD. So you can kind of see that existing hillside, how steep it is, especially in the northern portion, and the kind of grading that's required to get level access to the site from the existing roadway. I also want to just note the retaining walls. So most of the retaining walls you're seeing that are within the footprint of the building obviously won't be visible. There'll be a building on top of them. So when it comes to actual visible retaining walls, we're looking at 5 walls in the north side yard, which is adjacent to 70 Kings, and 3 walls in the south side yard. So in the south side, the walls would range from 3 to 5 feet in height, would for the most part maintain existing topographic contours. So especially at the property edges, there's no change at all proposed. So it kind of maintain the natural state there. To the north, in the north side yard, there's a series of more terraced retaining walls that are closer together. The first retaining wall, so what would be seen kind of from the street, would be about 9 feet in height. Just based on the top and bottom of walls, it might be a little bit shorter than that in reality, but be about 9 feet, and then there would be a series of walls going up, again, between 3 and 4 feet in height above. And the applicant has proposed, as part of its stormwater treatment compliance, since it does trigger our what we call a small project requirement for stormwater treatment, they're proposing rain barrel collection, so connecting up to the roof gutters. And you can see one of the rain barrels proposed in the north side yard at the highest kind of retained pad, and another in the rear yard. So when it comes to the Commission's action on these grading review applications, as you know, we don't have codified findings in the municipal code, but the Commission did adopt guidelines several years ago that are based on general plan policies. So the first guideline is that the proposed grading is minimized and designed to reflect or fit comfortably within the natural topography. So in this instance, the grading of the steepest portion of the site where it abuts the right-of-way is driven by the on-site parking requirements, again, with 4 parking spaces required, no available street parking, as well as the horizontal and vertical difference in topography between the existing paved travelway of Kings Road and the front property line. So the plan creates 3 graded pads to allow street level access to the garages, and the upper floors would step up the hillside. And the terrace side yards would maintain the existing topographic contours at property lines. The second guideline is that the proposed grading is designed to avoid large exposed retaining walls. So in this case, again, the walls in the north, the exposed retaining walls are located in the north and south side yards. Most of the walls are landscape walls, less than 5 feet in height, with the exception of the approximately 9-foot wall in the north side yard. There's a condition of approval included in the resolution, our kind of standard condition that per the code, that wall be either landscaped for screening or treated with different materials to kind of break up that massing by breaking up the wall into vertical bands. And the last finding is related to conserving existing street trees, California Bay, Laurel, Coast Live Oak, or Buckeye trees, all of our protected trees under the tree ordinance. So again, the project would require removal of most of the trees on site. Majority of these trees, there are 4 Coast Live Oak that are proposed to be removed. They're fairly small, kind of volunteer type of trees. They're not required to be replaced. The Monterey pine itself, while it is of 30 inches or more in trunk circumference, again, not considered protected necessarily, not required to be replaced. However, the city engineer actually is requiring that the Toyon street tree proposed to be removed be replanted on site. He's actually not open to payment for off-site. There have been some cases where he's been open to accepting off-site replanting, and in this case, he's actually requested it be replanted on site. So with that, and I do want to note, as the chairperson indicated, we got some late mail from a neighbor, Peter Grace, which you should have in your packet, with some concerns about, mostly construction management and the actual excavation process itself. He also had some other concerns related to building height and mass. So again, in Brisbane, we don't have design review for single-family homes. Basically, at building permit, staff reviews the application to make sure they comply with floor area, lot coverage, setbacks, all our physical development standards, but there is no design review process. So just want to make a note of that, since some points about design review were kind of raised in that letter. Okay, and with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Julia. Commissioner Saison, do you have any questions?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Commissioner Gomez.
No, not at the moment either.
Okay. Commissioner Patel.
Can you possibly just highlight for me which portions of the letter would deal with design review as an example?
Okay. Number 2, where he's saying, we don't know the full height of the structure and how it will change the view from Kings Road.
So it's
View concerns are typically related to, we don't have development standards pertaining to view protection.
okay.
Some design review ordinances, that is a big part of it actually in a design review process, right? We're looking at views or thinking about impacts like that. The story pole requirement, we don't require story poles unless it's on a mapped ridgeline, which this is not. That's typically required, again, related to design review, like you might see 99 Thomas would be the most recent example of a design review proposal for a single-family home because it's on a mapped ridgeline, it's in the RBA district. So that's a different circumstance where we would require story poles, but not in this case.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So are you
Sure.
planning a formal response to this in writing? Because I'm under the impression that the person who drafted this is unable to be here. Yeah.
Staff has talked with this person actually,
Right.
so and we're happy to converse with him further about this, but we have discussed the project with him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just trying to clarify.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for staff. The Toyon tree, which you indicate the city engineer has waived replacement at another location, you're not suggesting that the Toyon that is there is physically going to be moved, but that in fact it would be replaced in the same location. Is that correct?
Sorry, yeah, I must have misspoken. So usually, or in the past, the city engineer has said, well, remove the street tree, we will replant one somewhere else in the vicinity, whether
Right.
that's, so in this case, he has requested that the tree be replanted on the property, not elsewhere in the right-of-way.
Okay.
Can I follow up with that?
Mhm.
So when you say on the property, their physical lot,
Mhm.
so somewhere in their landscape design that they're going to submit to the city, they have to say, this is where we're going to plant this tree, and that's where it's going to
That's
grow
what he's requested.
forever. Okay.
May I?
Sure.
You know, with respect to, yeah, I'm very familiar with this area, walk it all the time. With respect to, you know, just having some type of, you know, tree canopy in the area, it would seem logical that we would, you know, if we're pulling out, obviously these are smaller trees, but that Monterey pine is a fairly large tree. Obviously the house is gonna cast, I guess, some additional shade as I run this in my mind. It would be nice to have some type of additional tree that's more north along the, you know, within that right of way. And I'm just wondering, is that something that the city engineer is just not, so I'd be to the far area, you know, within the sidewalk. I just think it'd be a nice aesthetic for the neighborhood.
That's definitely something you could have an advisory condition for if you want the applicant to talk with the city engineer about alternatives to on-site planting.
Well, I just think within the context of climate change, it makes a lot of sense that if we're putting in new structures, that we also think about, you know, urban forestry and the right tree species in the area.
So I just want to clarify, you're not saying instead of the Toyon tree, you're saying in addition to the Toyon tree, planting another tree that would add to the canopy, such as the pine that provides that canopy right now.
And I think it would provide a very nice neighborhood aesthetic for people walking, especially if you're putting the sidewalk there. You kind of have to look. So we're trying to encourage more public mobility and people, you know, using the sidewalk. So I think it makes sense to have an appropriate tree species there.
That's something we could certainly suggest.
Yeah.
And since there are additional trees being removed,
Yeah.
that's a possibility. I'd also like staff, if you could, would you clarify for everyone, the owners of the property to the south, which is looking at the plan, it's to the left, because that's a canyon, it's a fairly steep ravine canyon, and also to the due west, which is going up the hill, who owns those properties?
Right. So directly to the south of this property, it's owned by the city. To the east, or sorry, to the west, it's owned by the county.
And when you say owned by the city, because it's fairly steep and goes up, how
Right, not
far
all
up
of it.
does the city, what
What
would you say? I mean, does it go way up the hill, the city-owned portion?
No, probably between like 15 to 35 feet. It's hard to gauge.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly our jurisdiction ends at a certain point, and then it becomes county-owned land.
Okay, and interestingly, I would point out, kind of segueing on Commissioner Gomez, is that the city-owned portion there being a canyon, when you look at this vicinity map, that is not vegetated other than the one Toyon tree. So there's ample room there to plant additional
Yeah, potentially.
trees, potentially. Okay, anyone else?
I just have a quick question as it
Mhm.
relates to the pine. It does require a permit because the minimum circumference is above.
It requires a permit, but it's not considered protected.
Okay.
Like, if
Right.
our current ordinance says you need a permit, it's ministerial if it's not a protected tree.
Got it.
Anyone else? No? Okay, we're going to open the public hearing. If there's anyone here who's a member of the public wishes to speak, if you could fill out a slip or we'll call on you. But I'd like to know first if the applicant is here. I think if you're here and you'd like to address the commission, maybe we could have you step to the podium if you could identify yourself and how you're related to the project.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Wong. I represent the owner. So I want to address the 3 points that we have talking about tonight. Is one is the first thing is a retaining wall. Yes, it's a really steep hill. We have to have retaining wall to hold the structure. So we actually break up the retaining wall quite a bit, which is 5 tier on the north side and 3 tier on the south side to break the mass. And also the retaining wall is going to be a panther style, so it will be vegetation along the way, so it's not just one solid concrete wall. Second item is the 4-car parking garage. Since, as Julia, the staff already mentioned, there's no other way we can put uncovered parking in the site. That's pretty much only the way we can is cover garage and with 2 driveway, which take up quite a bit of the sidewalk. But that's the also the same design as the 80 King and 70 King. That they have a similar design element that we are proposing. Third is the tree. I totally agree with planting other tree or extra tree on the site to facilitate what we take out. So the owner initially agreed if we planting extra tree to accommodate whatever you guys agree on. We were willing to plant a new tree.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions from commissioners?
Just a
Okay.
small one. Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, we discussed a little bit planting smaller trees like on the sidewalk. Do you think that's something that would be doable?
We actually only have about 5 feet between the curb to our building, and that pretty much what we call sidewalk right now, and really don't have enough room for tree. But we actually the entry of our property have recess, and also we have vegetation with around the entry area, but along the garage, 2 garage, I mean the 4-car garage, that we cannot put anything in front. But if we could, we try to put panther along the how to say, the public right of way north and south side if we can.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea because at least the aesthetics, I think it would help if you did that.
Yeah, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking something along the lines. I guess the question is within the constraints of the code of doing something where you've got I'm just going to think out loud here. You've got a tree species and the type of configuration, it's a little bit subsurface to the sidewalk, and you've got some type of grading, that's over it, so it would be essentially in the middle of the sidewalk, similar to how you see in other cities where they integrate the right type of vegetation. Obviously, there is concerns about root damage to the sidewalk at some, down the line, so it'd have to be the right type of species and the right type of placement. But that's kind of where I was thinking that it made sense, north and south, to have some type of canopy on that street. I think it really would make the aesthetic pop, and I think you'd have a lot of. I just think it would really bring out the overall element to the area. So that's my thoughts.
And just to clarify that, do we know how deep that sidewalk is there? Is it just meeting the code, or is it going to be actually deeper than the code would require? Could staff address that? Between
So
the
I
2
think-
driveways.
Right. I think we have a 5-foot minimum for new sidewalks. And I think At least the way it's shown, this isn't really a engineered plan showing the width of the sidewalk, but I'm pretty sure 5 feet is our standard requirement that the city engineer would require. And I just want to remind you guys, obviously, any suggestion for a street tree, obviously the city engineer would need to consider. And
Right.
there are ways, obviously it's done in a lot of other cities, to install trees and sidewalks in such a manner that the roots don't disrupt the sidewalk. There are some ADA implications, I think, of, we'd have to have enough width to allow an unobstructed passage if that was something city engineer was willing to entertain.
And is this a rolled curb that would facilitate people parking within the white line?
It is not going to be striped for public parking.
Okay.
I believe our standard curb detail is a rolled curb, but I have not been made aware that city engineer will require that to be an improved public parking space. I don't think it meets the width.
Because I noted the white stripe on the one photograph. So I didn't see, visited the site, I didn't see any cars parked there, but there you go, right there.
Well, there's already parking on that side of the street.
Right.
It's on the east side.
Okay.
So I don't think any street parking is envisioned for the west side of that street, and I don't think the width, there's not even enough width to make a legal parking space anyway.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Patel, you had something?
So it sounds like what you're saying is you're amenable to, if you replace a high canopy pine, even if it's not on the sidewalk, to replace it somewhere in your landscape architect, even if it's not directly on the sidewalk, and also that you're amenable to replacing the toyon tree, well, as part of the conditions.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, we definitely can put another 2 or 3 tree, maybe further back of the yard, but
Right.
yeah.
Somewhere as it fits into your landscape scheme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can add that to that.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? No? Is there anyone else from the project here that would like to speak? No?
I think the owner is good.
Okay.
I believe the labor have questions, but if they, maybe I can come up to answer the question if they have.
Right, let's just address, I have a slip here. Thank you very much. Is it Merritt Wyden? Okay, thank you. Mr. Wyden, could you step up here to the podium?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Merritt Wyden. I don't know you guys. I know all the town council, but I don't get to meet you guys too much. Just as an introduction, my wife Autumn and I have lived at 80 Kings Road, which is right to the north, since about 1995. First as renters and then as owners, we began to fall in love with this place. And our son was born here. He plays, when he was a little boy, he's not so little now, but he used to play in that lot with those trees. And just as a aside, so I'm the CEO of a national company that does behavioral care to underserved populations nationwide through telemedicine. And my wife works at Brisbane Elementary School for several years. So I wouldn't call us big boosters or joiners, but we certainly are involved in our community. As an entrepreneur, I would be the last person on earth to try to get in the way of a man or woman or couple building a house on their land, because that's America and that's the way it should be. I have been approached by more than one of my neighbors, including Mr. Grace, but also a couple of others who have asked to be to remain anonymous, about concerns that we have. Now, they have concerns about whether or not how this house is going to look, and they haven't had a chance to see it. My feeling is, if they want to build an ugly house, I may live next to it, but they have to live in it, so that's up to them, and I think that's in the eye of the beholder, and I have no point about that, and I understand that there's no view requirements in the code. I'm sure that you guys have made sure that the plans are up to code. Our concerns in the neighborhood are much more about inconvenience and safety. We have no idea how long this project is going to take, what hours project is going to be built, which is going to be, I mean, if you think back to your picture, we are literally, how many feet from their house? 5 or 6? I don't know, maybe, I don't know where the house is going to be. A few, I mean, not a whole lot of feet. So there's going to be a lot of that. We're concerned, we don't know if there's going to be explosives used or something to move all that dirt. We would certainly be interested to make sure that people know about that and can plan our communal life about, and there's kids in the neighborhood, as you guys know, especially you since you walk around there, and more little kids. So we certainly want to make sure there's no little kids running around at the wrong time in the wrong place. We're certainly, I am told by Mr. Grace here, who supposedly did the math, that there's 100 truckloads of dirt moving out of there. Parking is already an issue up there. We'd certainly be interested in where those trucks are going to be placed, where all these workmen are going to be parking. They're going to be taking the small number of open spaces. There are spaces going down the hill where the people live. They're not always spaces. We happen to have 4 vehicles in my house because my son just learned to drive, and we have to park a couple of them out on the street, and sometimes it's difficult. I can't imagine what it's like with a bunch of workmen and 100 truckloads of dirt. We're certainly interested in how the dirt and dust that's being, because it's very sandy, dry soil, unfortunately. We're certainly very interested on where that dirt's going to go in terms of our, especially, well, I'm interested where it's going for me, but I'm sure they're also interested in where it's going for them. If you kind of remember, the wind tends to come through the canyon and head, in a sort of a northeasterly direction there. So, in other words, right at us and other people that live right down there. So we're certainly interested in that. So we and again of the schedule so that we can I mean, if it's going to be Kevin here said it was going to be 18 months, what protection do we have that it's not going to be 18 years or 2 years or before I die? I like to make sure that it's done and we have peace and quiet again in our neighborhood. So these are the kinds of things that the neighbors and I are concerned about. I have never been involved in one of these meetings or one of these processes, so I did not build that house. Gloria Ramos, as you know, built the house and most of the houses over there, so they've been built there for a long time. So I don't know how the neighbors are protected in these kinds of situations. Peter he's a bit wound up about these things.
Fastidious?
Sorry?
Fastidious?
Well, the word hysterical came to mind, but we won't use the H word here. No, he's. I kind of roll with the punches, but at least I'd like to know where the punches are coming from. So and they seem to be very nice people, and we'd love to have them as neighbors, and we're not trying to get in their way, but we just need to understand, I think, everybody on the street needs to understand what our rights are and how they get protected in a project that has the potential of being extremely disruptive to you know, the lives of many people that live downwind and that park in those parking spaces and that, you know, do what we do on a daily basis. So I apologize for my ignorance about planning. I know not, and architecture. I mean, you give me a floor plan, it's like, which is the bathroom? You know, that's all I know. I know nothing. So I apologize in advance for that. But that's what our concerns are.
And that's very valid that you appreciate your coming here to express that. And I think a lot of this can be addressed best by staff. And I understand your concerns, having lived near a project a door down that's going on for 5 years. I can echo your concerns, but there are regulations, and I think that they can clarify that for you.
Great. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
So could we hear from staff?
Do I stay up here? Or do I?
Wherever you're more comfortable, but if you're
where-
going to speak.
Right, if you may want to ask them a question as well.
Well, I took notes.
Okay.
So I heard a concern with construction impacts, so parking, truck trips. I believe that the applicant has prepared a construction management plan, which is typically required as per the grading, the city engineer's grading permit. And I believe there will be an access driveway graded out with a pad where the equipment would be stored, so that no public parking would be taken up by that. And there,
by the work people.
the work people and cars, I'm not sure if those are called out on the plan. So, I mean, of course, public parking is public parking, but I think that's a valid part of a construction management
mean,
plan for the engineer to.
If we were to, let's say, have a party and took up all the parking on the street, and that party went on for 18 months.
Right. No, heard.
Opposed to 3 hours. We get mad when someone takes up all the parking for like Saturday night. But if it was for one Saturday night, like Groundhog Day,
Sure.
every day, forever, then that would be a problem.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's something that can be added into a construction management
Right, we
plan,
would
is
love that.
identifying where employees and site workers will be parking.
And if I may, generally within a construction management plan, you're going to have the hours permitted, you know, when the saws are going, when the digging is happening, right? And I'm assuming that with respect to the neighborhood, maybe there's a way to, you know, stipulate the hours so that we're trying to work within
Right.
what the
Yeah.
community is
So, right. So the city.
openly thinking.
The city does have a noise ordinance that controls construction noise. So Monday through Friday, I believe it's 7 to 7. And on weekends, I think it's 9 a.m. to 7 or 9 to 5. We can confirm that. It's in our Title
I
15.
think you're correct.
So yes, they would have to abide by, you know, stopping work at certain times, not starting until,
7 to 7 a.m., 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday.
the code would allow such a thing. If that's, I can pull up the
These-
code
are
so we
these
can make
things
sure.
possible to be negotiated with in the neighborhood, because that's tough. 7 to 7.
I'm living through it right now for a year, so you're not alone, but it is the code.
Yeah, and
And,
sorry, didn't mean to.
oh, no, go ahead.
No, please continue.
No, that's all I had to say, is that it's not been negotiable. It is the code, so if they follow the code, they're within their rights to do that.
Yeah, there's 3 houses being built within
Yeah,
my area. They're all at different stages.
right.
Also, I mean, if they do work 7 to 7, it might be faster than if
Right.
they work 9 to 5,
Right.
right? I mean,
Well,
so
I'd go with 9 to 5 and a little
Right.
longer, but I hear what you're saying.
You can look at it as not prolonging the agony. That's how we prefer to address it.
And
Is
then
there-
oh,
Go ahead. I was
so
going
I
to say.
also heard concerns with erosion control. So
Well,
and dust.
dirt, dirt and dust being.
Yeah. So we do require, and again, this is a condition of the grading permit issued by the city engineer. There are best management practices that our countywide stormwater permit require us to impose. So basically, it says that your project site cannot have off-site dust or any sort of runoff if it's the rainy season, for example, to contaminate either the waterways or the air. There are tried and true kind of methods to control dust. Usually that involves watering. Could involve also tarping off areas. In terms of enforcement, if you ever, on any site in the city, if there's ever dust that you see and you think that the contractor is not addressing it immediately, you can always call the city, and we can have inspectors go out to make sure that those contractors are doing the right thing and managing their dust as they're obligated to do. You had said, what if it goes on for years, or maybe construction stops, and what protections you have?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming that that you guys are approving the construction plan, and that what happens if that construction plan is not abided by. I mean, they're not negotiating with me, I understand that. Though, I think it would be nice if, there was an attempt to come to reasonable accord with our little community of 6 houses, or 8 houses, which I think would be good for everybody. You've got kids and everything, and it's very close knit. I mean, people we've known everybody for years and years. So, and it's not like living on a ranch. It's pretty cheek to jowl. I think if we had some input in a friendly basis, I think that everyone would live. I mean, I'm sure they don't want everybody looking at the watch and saying it's 5 o'clock. In 5:01, I'm calling the cops. Which, if 5 o'clock means 5 o'clock, that means at 5:01 you could call the city and say, look, they're not abiding, and nobody wants that either. So I think that if there was reasonable accommodation on all sides, so that we all could live together during what is going to be a trying period, I think it would be helpful for all sides.
I think your concerns are genuine. I understand. I'm living through it and have been. I think some of what you're asking for is outside what the code dictates, but I will speak from my own experience that the sooner you develop a rapport with the owner and the operation that's going on, if you can try to talk to them, express your concerns, and work together so that there's not a friction going on, you'll probably come out better, because they're going to live there. So you
Right.
do want to be a good neighbor. They want to be a
Sure.
good neighbor to you. So on the front end, to try to establish that, and
And a
perhaps
really good barbecue.
right, and
Yeah.
perhaps you could facilitate that with the neighbors, of introducing them and saying,
I would be happy
here's
to
our
do that.
concerns, could you try to work with us?
Sure.
I don't know that that's something, and staff could say, that's not something that we can, at this level, establish that for you. Because the code is written to be uniform, and if we go outside of that, it's not uniform.
Right.
We're then dictating special circumstances to certain people, and we're not really allowed to do that. That would not be fair.
Okay. Well, I guess if we, the construction management plan, that is public record, I assume.
So that would be part of the application for the grading permit from the city engineer, which would be public information. I don't think they've submitted yet because they're waiting for this review. Is that correct, Kevin? They're waiting for commission action on this before they apply to the city engineer for the permit, but once they do so, it would be viewed by the public if requested.
Well, given that, I'm sure we'll be able to work together, yes? I can say that on behalf of myself and my wife and our son and neighbors, named and unnamed, we would not oppose any of this.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you so much for listening to me.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Staff, any other things you want to add?
Sorry, so I just pulled up the code. So the construction hours are in actually Title 8, not Title 15. Our health and safety ordinance, which is enforced by the police, which is why when we get a noise complaint for construction noise, the police go out there with a noise meter. So the construction hours are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on weekdays and 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. weekends and holidays.
And in terms of keeping it on schedule, there are permits. Permits expire, and usually it seems the property owners want to complete their project as soon as possible because they want to move in. So that's an incentive to them as well. So, anyone else, commissioners? No? Anyone else from the public? I don't have any more slips. Wish to speak? No? Okay, I would take a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll move to close public hearing.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay, commissioners, discussion. Commissioner Patel, you want to start?
So I just think that the applicant seems amenable to planting a high canopy tree on their property as part of the landscape plan, even though they're not required to. So I'd say we would put that as a condition as well as the tie-on tree.
Would you please, for anyone who doesn't understand that terminology, high canopy, explain what that means?
So the tree that's being removed, the pine, it has a higher canopy than a short shrub type tree. Those trees provide different types of shading, but they also provide a habitat for birds and other types of animals that live in San Bruno Mountain. So we would be asking that in addition to the tie-on tree, there would be a tree such as that's a high canopy that has a higher height be replanted as well.
I think the toyans only go to about 18 feet, as
Right.
opposed to, you're talking about something that goes 30, 40, 50 feet.
Right.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Saison.
Well, I think the applicants suggested doing this, so I just wanted to make sure that that was also included, because they're also removing some of the smaller oak saplings
Yes.
that for aesthetics purposes, they're going to try to put in some planters or whatnot in the front, just to add more greenery to the space. So if we could put that in.
Okay.
You both captured what I wanted to reiterate, was the vegetation concerns, and so I think if we make those recommendations, I'm content at this point.
So do we, in what I'm hearing about suggesting something on the front, be it planters, could be shrubs, small trees, and then larger canopy trees in the back, since there are 6 trees being removed and 1 is being kept, 1 is the street tree. So let's say
5.
there's 5 trees being removed
5 trees
that are
being removed.
on site.
That are on site. One
Correct.
tree being removed.
Right.
It's a street tree.
Do we
repl-
want to make a recommendation as for how many trees? Because it's a vagary to say, put some trees on the property. That could be anything from 1 to,
So my recommendation was just at least one large canopy tree, and then and replacing the tie-on. The issue then becomes, I'm just saying, knowing trees and how they grow, is if you have a high canopy tree, there might be other trees that you can't really plant because it takes up a lot of the light or growing radius or whatnot. So
And the other the other question I have is, if it's planted in the public right of way, it would be incumbent upon the city to maintain that tree. So maybe that's
it seems as though these
a
trees, though.
nuance.
Sorry.
No, it's a nuance. It just came to mind.
okay,
So-
but I'm hearing 2 different things. I'm
Right.
hearing where the applicant's talking about planting them on their property.
On the property.
On the west side, up
Correct.
the hill. And
Okay.
you're talking about planting them in the public right of way.
No. So I was
Okay,
saying.
so we were
So yeah, there was maybe a miscommunication.
Yep.
My understanding is that the city engineer is requiring them to place on their property within the 4 lines of their property,
Yep.
replacing that toyon tree. It is not an option to actually put it somewhere else. So the toyon tree would go on their property. In addition to that tree on their property, I would say 1 high canopy tree
Okay.
as part of their landscape management. However they want to do it, their drawings.
Okay.
Okay. And
My only concern with the planters in front was because of the sidewalk size and whether there's going to be any sort of obstruction of people with wheelchairs trying to
Yeah,
get by the street. So
That's a valid point.
so I don't know about planters in front, the size of them, and how that would affect it.
Yeah, I think, well, definitely they would have to consult with the engineers to
Yeah.
make sure it's to code, but
Right.
he felt, I thought, that they could do something with the frontage, so if,
Yeah, if it's feasible
yeah.
within the code constraints. I would like to see the city engineer explore options there. But
Okay, so Commissioner Patel is recommending one large canopy and the replacement of the toyon. Is that agreeable to
Yes.
the rest of the
Yes.
commissioners?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other recommendations that you'd like to make on this project?
So
And the addition of some sort of whatever might be deemed appropriate on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking like 2 or 3,
Yeah.
shrubs.
Container shrubs or small trees. As will still accommodate the public sidewalk access, which I believe is 36 inches. Is that correct, or is it more? 48? Yeah,
I wish I had the code memorized.
I can't remember. I did used to know and I don't know now, but, okay. So anything else, or is that complete?
That's it.
Okay, so personally, I think that's a good plan, to make those recommendations. And do we want to have a motion here to approve the project then with those 2 recommendations? And this would be a motion to approve project EX-2-17.
I move to approve project EX2-17 with the recommendations that we have made.
And a second?
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No one opposed. The motion carries, and I will add to that anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council. Appeal should be filed with the city clerk not later than 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decision. Thank you very much, and thank you, members of the public, who taking time to come to the meeting and express your views. All right, moving on our agenda. We have a second item, which is the zoning text and map amendment, RZ-4-18. This is regarding 3800 Bayshore Boulevard. It's an SCRO-1 zoning district. That's the existing zoning. And it's an R-MHP district proposed. This is regarding the area we would euphemistically refer to as the Sierra Point Mobile Home Park. Could we have a staff report, please?
Of course. So I just wanted to introduce Emilio Flamenco, who is our intern who's been working with us on a lot of planning projects, this being one of them, and he'll be giving the staff report tonight.
Good evening, Commissioners. The application before the Commission tonight is to implement Housing Element Program HB1I, which directs the city to rezone the Sierra Point Mobile Home Park into a new residential mobile home park, RMHP district. This would make mobile home parks and their associated uses the only permitted use. The application consists of 2 parts, amendments to the zoning ordinance text and to the zoning ordinance map. The amendment to the ordinance text includes adding a new chapter in district, RMHP, and amending other ordinance sections related to mobile home parks to maintain consistency across the ordinance. Copies of the red line text for the proposed amendment and the draft ordinance are included in your provided staff reports as attachments 2 and 3, respectively. Here's a graphic illustrating the existing zoning map compared with the proposed amendment. So how did we get here and why are we doing this? In April 2015, the City Council approved the present housing element, which contains program HB1I. This instructs the city to rezone the mobile home park at 3800 Bayshore Boulevard from an SCRO1, which is Southwest Bayshore Commercial, to a more appropriate residential designation. Program HB1I is included in your staff report as attachment 5 and is also on the screen. The rezoning of the mobile home park is intended to better preserve the current mobile home park use, which provides a valuable source of affordable housing for Brisbane residents. The program stems from increased concerns surrounding trends in the Bay Area real estate market and the ongoing housing crisis. Specifically, the fear that mobile home parks, including the one at 3800 Bayshore, may be threatened by market pressures to redevelop or convert from its present land use. To understand the differences between the current SCR01 and proposed RMHP district, let's review the current regulations in the SCR01 district. Currently, mobile home parks are only allowed as a conditional use. The SCR01 district contains a wide variety of conditionally permitted uses, including warehousing, contractors' yards, convalescent homes, and mobile home parks. The new RMHP district would designate mobile home parks and their associated uses as the only permitted use, with no conditional uses. The purpose of tonight's amendment is to ensure the preservation of the existing mobile home park in the site indefinitely. A rezoning is the highest level of protection the city can afford to lock in the site's existing land use from the external pressures of a red-hot real estate market, where developers might seek to reconvert the land to other uses. The changes to the ordinance text include certain physical development standards. I'll get more into them on the next slide. Tonight's amendment would not affect the areas listed on the right hand of the screen. The minimum number of parking spaces for the park will remain the same, as will the existing requirement of Planning Commission approval of a use permit prior to park closure or conversion. This is consistent with state requirements. Regarding certain physical development standards, because so many aspects of mobile home park development standards are regulated at the state level, local zoning regulations are limited to just a handful of areas, like trash enclosures, internal circulation, and screening. The city currently regulates these areas in the existing zoning ordinance, and these will be carried over to the new chapter. Let's get more in depth with what changes in the proposed amendment, beginning with item 1. There are currently no density requirements applicable to the mobile home parks in the city's existing ordinance. The amended text would establish a maximum density of 1 mobile home per every 1,500 square feet of park area. This is the same density standard for multifamily development in the R3 residential and current SCR01 districts. The park is currently fully built out, and this change will not apply retroactively to the site. Item 2. Fence heights in the mobile home park are currently limited to 6 feet. The proposed regulations would permit fence heights up to 8 feet along the side and rear perimeters of the park and up to 10 feet along the front where the boundary abuts the public right-of-way. Since Bayshore Boulevard is classified as a traffic noise corridor, allowing a greater fence height serves as an effective sound barrier and a screen for park residents. Regarding landscaping, the city currently does not mandate any landscaping requirements for mobile home parks. The amendment would require the perimeter of a mobile home park to be landscaped. And again, this would not apply retroactively to the existing park, only to future proposals. Such proposals to modify the physical conditions of the park would be subject to the Administrative Design Review, or ADR process. This ADR process would require a Community Development Director review and approval for proposed modifications to the park's internal and external circulation or construction of a permanent accessory structure 2 or more stories in height. The final item. Many typical residential district development standards, such as lot size, setback minimums, floor area maximums, are not included in the city's existing mobile home park regulations. As you'll recall from my last slide, the state regulates the vast majority of these standards. In tonight's proposed ordinance, the aforementioned items will be regulated to the extent that the city is legally allowed to. 2 weeks ago, staff had the opportunity to visit the site and speak with the on-site manager and also to distribute courtesy notices to residents about the proposed recommendation. In conclusion, staff recommends the Commission adopt Resolution RZ 418, which provides a recommendation to City Council to adopt the draft ordinance. And at this time, staff would be happy to address any questions the Commission may have. Thank you.
Commissioner Saison? Thank you, Amelia.
I don't think I have any questions.
Okay. Commissioner Patel?
I have no questions.
Commissioner Gomez?
No.
Okay. I have one question for staff. In the text of our packet for this project, or for this zoning resolution, it mentions the permanently constructed accessory structures. And that just sounds like a mouthful of something. Are there any permanently constructed accessory structures on that existing property? And it's referenced that those might be, it could be a meeting room or an administrative building. Are there any on the property? And going forward, would they be permitted to add them if they are not currently present?
Sure. So the site currently has, it appears to be a permanent structure. I think it's been there since the early days of the park, that I believe is going to actually be replaced soon with a temporary, or not temporary, but a modular unit. So yes, there is an existing physical community kind of, laundry building / storage / not sure exactly what it's been used for. That actually is, I think, planned to be replaced pretty soon. And the differentiation in the code, we said permanently constructed structure. So a modular unit, they're kind of constrained in their design and height anyway, just because of the construction. So that's why we recommended doing, if we are going to do any design review for any changes or new buildings there, that it only be for permanently constructed, on a foundation, permanent structures, not modulars.
Okay. And I just also wanted to clarify for any members of the public that it's noted, while there are changes proposed whereby landscaping could be changed on fence limits, but that the existing park is grandfathered in, they're not going to be required to make any modifications to what they have.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions?
I have one follow-up question. If there's a permanently designed building on that site and they're going to tear it down to make it into a modular home or whatever, or modular building, would that require a design review?
No. Not the way the text is worded, it would not. A demo permit, yes. But then to construct the modular building or install the modular building, that would not trigger administrative design review.
And segue to that, would they be held to the 20-foot height limit?
For accessory structures,
Yes.
that height limit does apply uniformly to accessory structures, I believe, but let me just confirm that.
G2.
Yeah. So the height limit would apply uniformly to any accessory structure, whether or not it's permanently constructed. Again, however, most modular units are not built to be more than 2 stories, if at all. So I think we tried to build in kind of realistic, what we expect might develop out there as a modular unit, and make sure that it would, that most of the cases would be exempt from administrative design review, or would comply with the height limit.
And just a little further clarification, so if someone said, oh, we should have a little coffee shop here, would that qualify as an accessory structure? I'm just trying to, for the benefit of anyone listening to this,
Right.
so they know exactly what could be permitted. Because also, is there a limit to the number of accessory structures? Because maybe someone says, I'm going to be the park manager and I'm going to build a house here now. And I'm going to bring my family, so we're going to have 2 houses. I mean, are there guidelines that or is that something that would just have to come up and we review it ongoing?
So just to clarify, the management for this park has, and I think probably will continue to in the future, live on site, and they live in a modular unit as part of the community. So management is already living on site. When you look at, or if you want to refer to the red line text on G.2.12, if you look under the permitted uses section, which is 17.11.020, accessory structures, including structures used for administration, maintenance, or other community services, are permitted uses. So, I would defer to the community development director if we'd consider a resident serving coffee provider as being a community service permitted under that.
Again, in my experience in working on mobile home parks, I've never seen anything that included those kind of facilities. What I've seen is where they have a community room with a kitchen where the residents can come and have an event or cook there, but not to have what you'd call a commercial dining facility. So I wouldn't consider that to be incidental to this kind of use. I don't think that kind of use would support a true staffed dining facility. So I think it's not an issue that's going to come up, and if it were to, we would consider that and not incidental to the main use.
Because it mentions home-based businesses, but I would assume that's not retail home-based businesses. Okay. Any other questions, Commissioner?
No.
Okay, we're going to open the public hearing. And I do have a slip here from Mr. Doug Button. If you could step forward to the podium, please.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson and members of the Commission. My name is Doug Button. I'm here to represent my wife and my family. My wife is a recent new owner of the park, although we've been owners for 20 years. Her family's owned it for 40 plus of the 60 years it's been there. I'd first like to say that I find this very odd that I had to hear about this from my park manager less than a week ago. Staff, nobody in this town reached out to us and said what they were planning to do, what you're considering, and while you're considering it. Talking to my park manager, as your intern said, what does that do? She collects rents. You know, my family owns this place, and I think since you're making a change that, although I know you probably don't consider it a taking, in my opinion, it is a taking. You're taking my rights to take it from commercial, which is currently zoned and has been and been using for 60 plus years, to saying it's going to be a new designated residential or RMHAP, that this is a new residential zoning district. It's not new. It's been zoned with a use permit under the commercial thing for 60 years, or at least 40 of them since 77, when my wife's family got involved. You didn't develop anything new. That's been there. We're not doing anything new. You have the opportunity to develop anywhere else that's non-developed now, and yet you've established nothing. All you've done is take this, and as I said, you've limited it on what the family can do with it now. There are no plans to change it. There never has been any plans to change it, but to sit here and say that this is a new development, that's ludicrous. Furthermore, we're highly regulated by the state. As you know, the Mobile Home Park Act of the state requires that anything that you do there is subject to their control, whether it's foundation pinnings or whether it's putting in modular units, trying to change some of the things. But the biggest hurdle you go through is closure of a park. There's no intention to close it, and I know you've added more restrictions now, or you're planning to add more restrictions. But like I said, nobody's ever reached out and told us why they have to do this. The only notice I know of this town doing something is you closed your own other mobile home park that the city bought with the intention of putting the city hall there, and then you turned it into a park. Well, you didn't consider those people being low income and all that. You kick them out, but you're telling me I have to leave this the way it is, even though the city did it what they wanted on their own property. Further, I am considering putting some supportive uses. There is, and I find this again ludicrous. Why does staff not know this, and then they can't even answer the question, what's there? Oh, we don't know. And they're talking about, well, there's a process of maybe putting in some other structures. For over a year, I've been working with the state, because they're the ones who permit this, to put in a new office, a new laundry room. The place has been neglected. My mother-in-law has been running it for 18 years, and the place is neglected. It needs a new office. It needs a new laundry room before they fall down. All of that's being changed. We're trying to add to this park. We're trying to keep it up. But again, restricting me by saying you're making a new zoning district, all what that does is mean that in the future, if something does happen, means I can't do anything but leave it as a mobile home park. Where does that help low income in this city if you don't develop anything else? Why are you trying to change the zoning here to make it harder on us? I thank you, and you probably do what you're going to do. But like I said, just the mere fact that nobody even reached out is absolutely incomprehensible. Thank you.
I think it would be appropriate at this point to have staff address the genesis of this. Emilio, you presented part of it, but this was in context of the housing element, which went past our city council, which is reflecting mandates coming down from Sacramento and the state of California So if you could please address that, because I think that's something perhaps Mr. Button may not.
That directive, may I say, was established in 2015. It said that you had to develop new residential units. Didn't say anything about changing zoning on existing.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, actually, there was a general plan policy that, in the housing element that Amelia will pull up. This is in the adopted housing element. And again, this was basically at the urging and direction of the state of California, HCD, the reviewing agency who reviews the city's housing element and is charged with approving it or not approving it or certifying it. And this was one of the issues that was very much in their mind when the city did prepare the last housing element and went through the entitlement process. Approval of that was to, they looked at that as an important resource for housing, low to moderate housing in the city, and they're very interested in how the city was going to do its best to ensure that housing stock was preserved. And in response, this policy was adopted as part of the housing element approved by the council in 2015. In terms of notification and with this particular application, I'll defer to Julia to.
Sure. So obviously we're legally required to notice the owner of the property, which we did. We used the county assessor's database for basically the property, where the property tax bill goes. Okay, so we sent a legal notice and I hear you, but we sent the legal notice as well as a letter inviting conversation with a property owner. We also sent a staff report too when it was prepared. So we've attempted to engage with the property owner, and I think we still can. The process is not done yet.
Is there any other member of the public who wishes to address? No? Okay. That being said, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Discussion here. Taking into account concerns of the property owner, and I appreciate the fact you seem to run a fine establishment there. In reading through the material for this resolution and rezoning, it's establishing a zoning district, which we've done quite frequently over the past months, trying to refine the zoning in Brisbane. Council had identified that there were many areas in town that were never truly clarified with changes of use or fully reflecting the current uses. So this is part of where, as I understand it, this is coming from, and also reflecting what I'm sure you've heard, the preponderance of the mandates from Sacramento about preserving housing stock and affordable housing. And also, I think the emphasis is on Sacramento will say many types of housing. And what we've seen is a lot of mobile home parks disappearing in favor of market rate housing. So this is part of, it seems, that whole plan to have cities identify and recognize, establishing the zoning to identify what that use is in that area in an attempt to say, this is the allowed use and we would like to continue it because it does retain certain income and housing size and style that is appropriate in a very diverse city with lots of income levels and lots of different housing stock. So I'm just acknowledging that for the record. I think it's important to understand that's where this is coming from. But I'd like to hear from my fellow commissioners as well. Commissioner Gomez, would you like to start?
Well, and thank you, Mr. Button, for sharing your comments and kind of, I guess, more of a general question hypothetically. Because what I'm hearing from you is that hypothetically in the future, you're looking at this rezoning as restricting your ability as a private property owner to do something different, right? With the property.
Excuse me, could you Could you, sir, come to the microphone, because there are people sometimes watching this at home and they can
I
need to hear
apologize,
you.
I really.
That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm kind of working
I know.
through this. Is the, hypothetically speaking, in the future, in the far future, rezoning could happen, but currently we're in the midst of a housing crisis, and as Commissioner Mackin, you elaborated very well on kind of the background on how we got to this point. And if I heard you correctly, sir, you don't have plans to change it from an operating.
Not at all.
Right.
And I
And
fully recognize the housing issue in
Right.
the entire Bay.
yeah, and if I think I also heard you have plans for property investment to improve some of the structures and stuff. I think that is well within the guidance of the zoning. So we're not handcuffing you there. But
There's a whole new set of rules now.
But I hear you
Under-
there, and I think
fixing that structure.
yeah.
First it was the state, now I've got another set of rules, fencing and landscaping and all this. But
and having
Well, but the fencing and landscaping
know
is
it's-
grandfathered in. You
Yeah.
don't
I know,
have
and
to-
so is the landscaping for
Right.
now.
Right.
And then when I go to put the building up and everybody's going to be up in arms or whatever, or somebody will come in and say the parking, all of this is subject to change. You just changed it now, or you're changing it now.
Well, but
And I realize things happen.
right. I think what Commissioner Gomez is trying to point out is that there are things being written into this that allow you to do different fences or landscaping. It's not requiring it.
I
The,
agree.
the parking is there. It mentions the density is not high density. And so I'm not sure what changes you're concerned about that you're being forced to change.
There's a
because-
whole nother set of rules is all it is. And sooner or later, it's going to apply to me. And that concerns me. And the bigger issue is, as I say, hypothetically, the property is zoned under the Bayshore, whatever commercial area, and not 1 inch on the other side of me is being rezoned for anything else or being preserved into low-income housing area, but you're making me do that. So the guy next door can build 30 condominiums or a commercial building, and in the future, if something happens, I'm being restricted, and yet I've had that right for 60 years. And you're doing this in the pretext of, yes, we need to preserve housing. City, as I said, didn't do it in their own use of the mobile home park, and yet you're restricting me. And I understand things have changed. But I also realize that you're not looking at any other areas to do this. And that is handcuffing me, because it just is one property out of an entire community. You didn't say, let's designate or rezone 4 different properties so I could develop another one or somebody else might. But you're just saying, oh no, I want to make sure this one so you can never do anything else with it. And as he says, maybe there isn't any plans, but there was no plans in Santa Rosa when a fire wiped it out and wiped out all the infrastructure and you can't rebuild it. And it's like, but they can convert it to something eventually. There's no plans to do anything if there's a major earthquake, but it might take that whole hillside down and wipe out this whole property, and who knows what's going to happen then.
There's one thing I think might be helpful here, if our planning director could clarify. This would not negate, even with the zoning, that someday this would not be a mobile home park. I did not read that. Could you please clarify that?
To close the mobile home park and convert it to an alternate use would require several actions. It would require an amendment to the housing element, which is amendment to the city's general plan. It would require a rezoning, and it would require a use permit for a park closure. So those are all actions that would be required to close and change the use of this property.
And
Wood
currently,
permit.
those are not in place, just the state has the only
And the use permit
requirement.
requirement.
So you're adding additional burden on me. And that's not fair when it's the only place in this entire community. Why didn't you designate some other property? or more additional properties.
Again, just to clarify.
I've never seen a zone that's just one little piece of property.
Again, just to
Ridiculous.
clarify, if I could clarify for the record that, the housing element contemplated a number of different activities, involved a number of programs. As the chair will remember, a number of sites were designated for housing in Crocker Park, for example, to meet our shortfall of required housing sites. So there are other sites in Brisbane that are evaluated routinely and are occasionally rezoned to meet our housing obligations.
And currently, if I close the park, which is almost an impossibility, but it is a possibility that I could close it by paying people off, moving them out, and even changing it under the present use, building, say, condominiums and offering low income to those 60 residents. That's an allowed use right now.
That's
But
correct.
it's not going to be in the future, and that's not fair.
And again, certainly
I'm the only one.
every entitlement, every land use decision the city makes, its general plan is subject to change, the zoning is subject to change. If in some unspecified future time, the property owner has an interest in changing the land use, it'll be evaluated in the context of the conditions at that time. The conditions we're in now with the housing element we currently have, we are obligated, committed to making this rezoning change. Whether there's a need to revisit this in the future as part of a future housing element is another issue. I would also point out that the state HCD actually just the other day, today as a matter of fact, we got this very interesting announcement about how they're under a state law that was passed last year. They now have the ability to, instead of a housing element where it's being once you certified it, you were done with the state for 8 years. And now they're basically reasserting the right to reopen anybody's housing element at any time to verify compliance. And I think you'll note we had a deadline of December of 18 to accomplish this particular program. So any action we took that would not allow for this to be completed, obviously provide some exposure to the city of Brisbane at this point if that were not to happen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see, who have we not heard from? Commissioner Sizer?
Boy, obviously Mr. Budden makes a lot of good points, and I'm moved by it. So it's, I had in mind a certain decision, but he's somewhat impacting how I'm seeing this. So I'm not quite sure right now.
Okay, fair enough. Commissioner Patel?
So this is kind of an interesting situation because Mr. Bunn's family has provided a service to many people in that mobile home park for a very long time. And there are no plans currently to change the actual use of that piece of property. He has no plans at all. He's concerned about potential future possibility. That possibility could or could not exist in the future. We don't know. There's a real need to provide the service that Mr. Bunn's family provides because mobile homes remain a affordable option for many people that cannot purchase even a low-income condominium. So I can understand where the city council would want to make this a mobile home park and make it remain a mobile home park because it provides a very important service. I think there was miscommunication in that Mr. Button's family maybe should have been notified of meetings when the city council.
It'll like to have been part of the process.
Right.
Instead of just reacting to a notice I got 3 days ago and what I printed off the internet.
Right. And maybe some of the frustration that you're expressing
Absolutely.
has to do with that. So as much as I can say on behalf of our council on this, we apologize because you didn't get notice,
Not
and
your fault. I
we
understand.
tried.
And
I think that
I'm not
there was,
blaming staff. It just happened, but it's it's frustrating in August when people are on vacation and I get notice and it's from my manager who, nobody, I realized there was something sent to my resident, but, if this was passed in 2015, there's been plenty of opportunity to have a discussion and,
And I think a lot of the discussions that we're having right now as to whether it should stay mobile home, not stay mobile home, whether it fulfills a need, and whether we need to comply with state regulations happened at the city council meeting. And it was unfortunate that you weren't able to participate for whatever reason. And I don't know how that notice was not provided to you, or how you did not get it, or what happened in that communication breakdown. So I'm with you. It's a difficult decision.
Thank you, commissioners. I think one thing that is maybe not being made clear here is that, and so I'll use the example of the Parkside area. There are property owners there. It's been commercial for a long time. There's commercial buildings on it. And yet that has been rezoned. And one of the reasons is, as a city, there are mandates we get from Sacramento, which
I understand.
we don't have the ability to just say, no, we're going to ignore it. And so those property owners were rezoned. There are still commercial buildings on them. There's no housing there. Maybe there will be, maybe there won't be, but it is rezoned.
To
And
commercial, to a higher and better use in some respects.
it's zoned to residential as well. So in terms of, I can appreciate where, if this is coming to you and you're saying, why me? This is a mandate coming down from more areas than the city of Brisbane. And the difficulty is then for us to say, I empathize with you, but we're going to tell Sacramento, oh, no way. We're going to ignore what you're saying has to happen. And so the only thing I can circle back and offer you is that you're saying, well, if I want to do something, I have no plans, but in the future I might want to. It doesn't stop you from doing that. Will you have to go through more things? Yes. I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, you will. But otherwise, there's no change. You're still being guided, or you're being administered by the rules in Sacramento, the same as it always has been. You still have the same tenants. You don't have to add any physical structures. None of that has changed. The only thing that changes is if you change the use, you're going to have to go through a process. And that's not coming just from us. That is coming from Sacramento and the zoning. So while
I had to do that beforehand, though.
Okay. But what I'm saying is, while I can understand anyone who says, I don't like being told what to do, we're told what to do too. So sometimes there's no easy choice here.
I am not objecting to
Right.
that.
So I think that's something to keep in mind. John, you look like you wanted to add something to this.
I don't think it'll sort of satisfy Mr. Button, but I would point out that one of the benefits of this zoning, the park, under its current zoning regulations, any sort of modifications would require a use permit. Again, we're eliminating those requirements, so the improvements to the site, the laundry building, this and that, will be able to be done ministerially without a use permit process, the fee and the time. So we are trying to actually allow for the site to be improved in a more expeditious and cost savings fashion for the owner.
Okay, thank you. Okay, commissioners, thank you, Mr. Button. We
Thank
have
you
a
for your time.
decision to make. Further discussion? Commissioner Gomez?
No.
Commissioner Saison?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do see the unfairness. I understand what Mr. Button is saying, that if let's say in the future, he wants to construct a different type of housing. He's still providing housing, which is what we need in the city, but he wants to maybe change it from a mobile park. We're really, I think, putting more of a burden for him in doing so, and I think that's what his point is. I mean, if the goal is to provide housing, you know, are we unfairly limiting him to just one type of housing?
I think that the clarification needs to be made there, which is your point's well taken, but that what the state mandate is trying to do is preserve certain types of housing. And mobile home parks are considered good retirement housing, affordable, sometimes medium, lower income. And while he may choose to change the site, it might be replaced with market rate housing, which is not affordable. So you have displacement of all these residents. And so part of this coming from Sacramento is to preserve the affordable housing as part of this.
Could we not limit the housing to only housing for low income, affordable housing?
Staff?
I mean, that raises a whole another set of issues. I appreciate the concern that something may happen speculatively in the future, but the idea of trying to plan for a speculative project and what that may be and when that might happen, I think that's a conversation best left for a project that gets proposed there, and everyone can understand what's happening at the time that project is proposed, not trying to, you know, again, requiring 100% low-income housing on this project. I don't know that that would somehow, the property owner would feel he's gained a lot of benefit, frankly, but that would be, I guess, something you want to ask him if he thinks that's a reasonable alternate outcome. I wouldn't recommend that.
Commissioner Patel?
Just to go to Commissioner Science point, I mean, there's a whole strip of zoning. That's one type of zoning. It's commercial with like a chunk in the middle taken out that's being made mobile home. It just seems weird. That's not typically how maps are drawn. I understand what staff is saying. I understand where city council came from, but I don't think it's completely crazy where there's a question asked about, well, is this an unfair limitation on one person versus an entire group of people that sort of have land on that strip of land? I mean, on that strip of Brisbane or part of that Brisbane. I mean, there is just one orange section that's in the middle of a series of commercial property. It seems weird.
You have the same thing with Parkside. It's one little part in the middle of other zoning around it. So it's not completely unusual for Brisbane. And we had the Southeast Commercial District as well. It was a very small amount of property at the very southern end of the city. So I'm not trying to counter you, but just say that this is not completely out of the ordinary.
The only difference, I think, is that with those two developments, there's multiple property owners that are impacted, whereas in this one, there's one versus many others.
Okay. Further discussion?
Having said that, I think Mr. Button would agree that if he had been more informed and more part of the process, he would be less maybe irritated or annoyed with what the end result was. And that's nothing that we can change, and it has been zoned. I mean, it has been used for this particular purpose where his family's provided a service to people that need it and continue to want, and it seems as though his family does want to continue to provide that service. And in fact, he's talking about improvements to the park to make the service that he provides even better. So I understand where in the future, if he wants to change the zoning and he has to go through a couple more steps, it's really irritating and for him to do that. There is no plans for that at this point. There's nothing that indicates that that's what's going to happen or want to happen.
So are you making a recommendation?
Yeah, I will recommend that we adopt. What's that?
It's
1 second, I have it right here.
zoning text and amendment RZ-4-18.
Yes, I move to adopt that zoning regulation.
And a second? I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll say no.
Okay. 3 favor, 1 opposed. Motion carries. Again, I'll read the appeals process. Anyone may appeal the action of the Planning Commission to the City Council, except where specified otherwise. Appeals shall be filed with the City Clerk not later than 15 calendar days following the Planning Commission's decisions.
And just to note this, since it's a recommendation to council, will be scheduled before the council regardless.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Button, for showing up.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, we have items initiated by staff. Request to study parking ordinance to define new use categories and parking requirements and modify structure of existing ordinance.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Chair. The city's parking ordinance was adopted in '84, and it's been amended from time to time and changed in requirements and market conditions and other reasons, regulatory issues. And again, just recently, the commission heard a use permit for a change for a parking in Sierra Point. It was for an R&D use, and the operator, the tenant, the developer of that site indicated that the characteristics of R&D were very different from office use, and the city's zoning ordinance did not really recognize R&D as a unique type of land use. Again, when the ordinance was created in '84, R&D wasn't really a common occurrence. So again, very specifically, we want to look at the ordinance to look at updating it for R&D, and we also would like to look at the opportunity. There's some other things happen in that zoning ordinance over time as it evolves, and you find certain discrepancies and inconsistencies, and we'd like to use this opportunity to look at the parking portion of the ordinance to clean up issues that are either based on changes that have occurred over time or just practical issues of implementation that have occurred over time. So we're requesting that the commission adopt a resolution authorizing the review of off-street parking ordinance. Again, just by way of clarification, there are 3 ways an ordinance amendment can be initiated. It can be initiated by the council, it can be initiated by staff, or it can be initiated by the commission. Staff will normally only initiate amendments for consistency with state law. This certainly isn't a requirement of that. In this case, we believe it would be appropriate for the commission to initiate it. You already have a little bit of a taste of the issue at hand, and that's why we're recommending you initiate the ordinance amendment.
I'd like to ask a question, which is the actual resolution itself refers to review non-residential standards, so on and so forth, and says may also include recommended amendments to the residential standards. So my question here, our off-street parking, how much of this is being generated by commercial uses changing in Sierra Park, Sierra Point, or is some of this, it's pretty common knowledge in Brisbane, we have a lot of residential furor right now over parking. At the same time, I might point out, I'm aware that Complete Streets has been reviewing parking, and they ran a poll, and it's a non-scientific but very small sample. Is this coming from you in planning? Is this coming from the council? What's the source of this?
The intent is to address, it's from staff, and it's primarily to address commercial standards. We went through about a 6-year, probably took about, 5 years to update the residential parking standards that probably was adopted 3 years ago. I have no intention of reopening that at this particular juncture. That's not the intent of this, is to reopen residential parking standards. Again, that was another housing element driven requirement that we had to, again, parking being a constraint on housing, and that was something we addressed as part of a housing element implementation measure. So this is intended to address primarily the non-residential, and there's some cleanup. There's just some wording and some of the things of parking exceptions and parking use permits that just need some cleanup. So I think it's going to be more of the cleanup sort of route. And we want to go ahead and basically create a matrix of all the land uses that are permitted in the various zones and see if we actually have parking standards that fit, for example. We want to really see if we have some other hole we're not even aware of at this moment. So it's more of a kind of a holistic cleanup, as well as kind of addressing very specific issue, which is R&D, which we'll see in other places in Brisbane in the future.
So, do you need a motion to pass this resolution? Or
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. Could we have a motion, please?
May I ask just one other question?
Sure, absolutely.
So the recommendation to pass this resolution is for city staff to do this study, or is it to create a committee to do this study?
What'll happen is that we would initiate a code amendment, and we would probably bring it back in a workshop setting to the commission as a whole.
Okay.
I don't think, if you wanted to create a subcommittee just to focus on it, that's your option. We were thinking we'd come back with a workshop for the group as a whole, give you some of our preliminary ideas and thoughts, get your feedback, and then modify it or establish it as a formal ordinance through a formal public hearing. That's our thought process.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
No? Okay. All right. A motion?
I make a motion to adopt resolution PC-3-18.
And a second, please.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. We move on to, do we have any other staff items, by the way? No? Okay. Items initiated by the commission, commissioners?
Just a reminder that we have the meeting on the, I'm forgetting for the update to the tree
Subcommittee.
subcommittee, I'm forgetting the actual terminology, I apologize, but it's for
The tree ordinance.
tree ordinance
subcommittee,
review process, and I believe we have that locked in for the 21st.
21st.
There was a little difficulty scheduling that.
In conjunction with open space and
Yes,
ecology.
exactly, yeah, that's a collaborative effort. It just took a bit, so looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
Nope.
No? Okay. I will entertain a motion for adjournment to our next meeting of August 23rd, 2018 at 7:30 p.m.
I move that we adjourn to our next meeting of August 23rd.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No one?